Hi Year 6 and welcome to Friday's science lesson. Today we're going to continue looking at adaptation. In yesterday's lesson we looked at how different animals were adapted to different extreme environments like Arctic conditions and desert conditions. Today you're going to be creating some animals who are adapted to a certain place. So let's start off with a bit of a thinking task, an odd one out. Have a look at the pictures, pause the video and decide which is the odd one out. There's no right or wrong answer, you just need an explanation to back it up. Okay, so let's check first of all that you spotted all the animals, because certainly for that first picture, I got a bit thrown by it. If you look closely, it is actually a moth on a tree, and it's a little bit like those, it looks like those peppered moths that we read about a couple of weeks ago. It's a moth on a tree. At first, I thought this was the eye of the animal, and I thought it was some kind of chameleon or something. So it's actually a moth on a tree. The animal's kind of clearer here, but he does look like a leaf or a twig. And here, the animal's a fish led on the bed of the ocean. So you might have thought of different reasons. You might have thought one was the odd one out because you could see them and you couldn't see the other ones. You might have used words like camouflage. You might have talked about one being the odd one out because it's underwater and the other's not. There's no right or wrong answers to odd ones out, as long as you had an explanation to back it up. So let's move on then. We're going to talk now about what happens when you introduce a species to an environment. Okay, so introduced species, sometimes they are known as alien species, and it means a species that has been introduced to another country by humans. Now that might be accidental, like they didn't mean to release them, or deliberate, they've put them there to see what would happen. So they don't naturally occur there. So the human could physically take the animal and place it there to see how it would adapt or survive. So a bit of an experiment, and that would be deliberate. Or you could accidentally introduce it, like for example, some form of plants growing where they wouldn't usually, where they've been accidentally transported on somebody's shoes by walking through somewhere that has the plant, getting some seeds on your shoes, and then transforming it to another environment. And then suddenly these plants will grow somewhere they don't usually. So that's what's meant by an introduced species. Here's an example of that really happening. So this is a newspaper article, and it is about reindeer that were introduced to the Antarctic. So it says alien reindeer thrive in the Antarctic. Norwegian whalers were the first to introduce reindeers to Antarctica, and now it's impossible to get rid of them. So Norwegian whalers, people who go look for whales, introduced the reindeer to the Antarctic island of South Georgia between 1910 and 1925. The animals were shot for food and also hunted for sport by the whalers who were stationed on the island. So now, or at the time of this article being written, they're planning a research stay to come and go and have a look at the reindeer. So they're now wild and they can't be removed. So it says there are about 3,000 to 5,000 animals on the island that had never had any kind of animals like this before. They also, the whalers that lived there, also introduced cats and rabbits, and they did survive as well. So knowing that there's so many of those animals left means that they have survived because they've been able to reproduce and create offspring. And maybe those offspring are slightly different to reindeers that you'd find somewhere else. And the person writing the article has ended by saying they wonder what impact this had on the vegetation, so the plant life, since there were no herbivores before the reindeer. So the reindeer must eat the plants on the island, and that would then impact the plants and the growth of the plants because they weren't used to anything feeding on them before. So this is a real life example of taking an animal from somewhere else, putting it somewhere where it doesn't belong, and it actually being able to survive. We have to think about, though, what problems this might cause, because obviously, I'm just trying to make this a bit smaller. Obviously, it is an unnatural thing to do. So pause the video and have a think. What problems could there be with putting alien species into a habitat they don't belong in. There might be problems for the animal and there might be problems for the environment. Pause and come back with your ideas. Okay, so some things that you might have thought about. The animal, first of all, the animal might not survive. Okay, it might not have the food that it needs. It might not have the camouflage that it needs. It might not have a warm enough coat, or it might not have cool enough to stay cool. For the environment, it might be just like we were reading a minute ago about the reindeers. The environment might suffer because suddenly plants or animals that were living there are now food for the new animals that have been reintroduced. So it won't necessarily always work, and it can cause knock-on problems because at the end of the day, it is unnatural. Now, let's have a think about how we could take an animal and put it into a completely wrong place, because this is what your task is going to involve later. Let's do this example together. How might a normal black and white pet cat have to adapt physically, so its physical characteristics, what might have to change over time for it to be able to live in the Sahara Desert? Pause and come up with as many ideas as you can. Okay, so I'm thinking to adapt in the Sahara Desert, it's going to probably want some camouflage. It's going to stand out really, really clearly, isn't it? Black and white on a kind of orangey desert. So it might have to start to change its fur colour over time. It might want to even lose its fur or develop some kind of system where it can release heat, because it's going to be way hotter in the Sahara Desert than being a pet cat, say, in England. Okay, it might have to change some of the things that it usually eats because it might not, those things might not be available there. And you might have thought of lots of different things. So let's introduce your independent task for today. Okay, you are going to choose an animal, any animal that you like, and then pick a new extreme environment for you to go and hypothetically dump it in. You're going to have to think how it would adapt both the physical adaptations, like its body that we looked at yesterday with the penguin and the thorny devil, and behaviourally in terms of what it does and how it reacts to situations. So here's an example here. So I've created the Antarctic koala. Okay, so I've taken a koala and I've imagined I'm going to dump it into the Antarctic. So I've got my picture and then I've labelled things up. So it's going to develop an extra thick layer of fur to keep warm. Its curved claws are going to adapt to be able to grip the snow. So I'm going to label up all of its features. Then I've written under here how it would adapt. So I've started off the paragraph for you, and you'll need a physical adaptations paragraph and a behavioural adaptations paragraph. For example, if a koala were to live in Antarctica, it would need to adapt physically. Some physical adaptations that could happen are developing a new extra thick layer of fur to be able to withstand the freezing cold temperatures, for example. Okay, so you need an animal, an environment. So it could be the desert cat, the Antarctic koala. A picture which labelled with your adaptations that you've invented. A short paragraph about its physical adaptations, a short paragraph about its behavioural adaptations. And then if you wanted to challenge yourself further, you can add a paragraph on the impact that it would have on its new environment. For example, what it would eat and how that would impact what's there already. So get creative with it, but think back to yesterday and looking at the animal's real adaptations to make them believable, okay? So it's going to be creative, it's going to be a little bit silly, but it's also going to have that science base because you need to think about what they would have to adapt to suit a new extreme climate. So it might be a desert climate, a rainforest climate, a polar region, okay? Look forward to seeing what you get up to. Thanks for joining the lesson. Have fun with it.